Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. My guest today is probably best known in the UK for his books Fishing Small Flies, Tying Small Flies and Splitting Cane. He has also written Trout Lessons that looks at how to approach difficult fish, Fly Fishing the Tailwaters and Seasonal, A Life Outside, that chronicles his life working for the US Forest Service. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ed Engle and welcome him to the Fly Culture Podcast today. Ed, it's lovely to speak to you. How are you doing today?
I couldn't be better.
That's great to hear. And are you getting out fishing?
I actually went fishing yesterday on the South Platte River.
Fantastic. And how was it? Did you get midge hatches? Did you find some rising fish?
It was interesting because it's been real windy here, and that made things kind of tough. And yesterday in particular, the water was really low, really clear, and I was trying to find blue-winged olives, which I guess they're not quite hatching yet here. There were a few midges, but it was tough enough that I didn't do any good. I got skunked, and I always tell people that if you've never been skunked fishing, you probably don't fish much.
That makes me feel, and I'm sure many of our listeners feel a whole lot better as well. So are you looking at this time of year? Are you still looking for rising fish? Are you waiting for those hatches and waiting for the right spots?
Oh, yeah. I'm always looking for rising fish. And I knew I was a little early for the blue-winged olive, but I have been fishing the midges, and that hatch has been coming off pretty well. But for some reason yesterday, it was real sparse.
Yeah, I'm hoping and keeping my fingers very, very tightly crossed. I was hoping to try and catch a fish on a dry yesterday, but the rain here, we've had similar to you, wind and heavy rain, and the rivers are all washed out at the moment, so they'll keep for the time being. But the South Platte, I've been very lucky enough to fish. I have very fond memories of fishing there, and I actually fished there on the 4th of July with a friend of mine who's American. And we were fishing the river, and we watched car after car heading up past us on the river to fish near the dam there. And I was saying to my friend, wow, this is going to get really busy. And he said, no, don't worry. You watch what happens at lunchtime. And lo and behold, everyone at lunchtime, I guess, headed back for a barbecue and everything else. And we had the dream section, and I think it's called the dream section, if I remember rightly, at the top to ourselves just below the dam there. And that was some pretty special fishing.
Yeah, that happens a lot here. A lot of people, they'll head home at about noon, or they'll go to another section of the river or something like that. And the section you fished is real well known for large fish. So how was the dry fly fishing?
The dry fly, I must admit, at the top by the dam, I nymphed there. And at that time, this is going back a little while now, and Czech or these European-style nymphing techniques hadn't really coming in any meaningful way. And I was lucky enough to have a rough idea how to do that, and I caught some fish there. But I remember we finished our trip, actually, downstream from there, on a section where they'd blasted or drilled through part of the rock, and we parked near there. And I remember I had some sublime dry fly fishing early evening, and again we had the river to ourselves, and it was a fabulous river. I have many, many happy memories of.
Yeah, that section with the tunnels is where I was yesterday. They call it 11 Mile Canyon. So yeah.
Gotcha. I remember that. Is it one of the videos about bamboo rods you're fishing along there? I sort of kind of remember that and recognize it as well.
That's right. Yeah, I did a video a number of years ago up there, and we had a good day. It was a trico hatch, which is a small mayfly. They call it a black and white. And we had a great spinner fall, and that was a good day fishing.
That sounds amazing. And for our listeners, just so that you know, the South Platte, if you don't, in the UK, is based in Colorado. Would that for you, Ed, be your home river then?
That's my home river, and it's important to note that the sections we've been talking about, they're tailwaters, so they're the river below a dam, and the dams vary. Some of them, the water is released from the bottom. Some of them it's comes off the top, but they're similar to spring creeks, but not exactly the same. You don't get the same insect diversity on tailwaters like maybe you'd get on a spring creek or just a free-flowing river.
Got you. And would I be right in thinking then, if the water's released from the bottom, shrimp and everything else might be an important part of the fish's diet too?
It can be if the shrimp are in that reservoir above, they can be important. It seems like when I first started fishing these tailwaters, and that must have been, I don't know, 50 years ago, it seemed like there are a lot more shrimp in than they are now. So I'm not sure what's happened, but yeah, freshwater shrimp are a factor, and that's one of the reasons these fish grow big.
Yeah, those ones below the dam were some sizable fish, and they were tricky. I think I managed to catch one or two of them. I found a few that felt sorry for the English guy and gave me a little bit of a chance. So that was great, and it's interesting you talking about how the period of time that you've actually been fishing. What have you noticed? What has well, first off, have you changed as an angler since you first picked up a fly rod? Have you noticed how you look at fishing? Do you look at it in a different way from when you first started?
I look at it considerably different. Anymore, I don't need to catch every fish in the river. There was one point in my career where I did think I needed to catch every fish. That didn't go well. But I'm more interested now in dry flies. I'm less interested in nymph fishing, although I can nymph fish. And I've embraced some of the Euro nymphing techniques, although I'm not seeing it. It's just starting to catch hold here. You're not seeing people do it. Most people are fishing indicator nymph fishing here. But I like to just look for rising fish now, particularly on my home water. If I'm on another river, I'll fish whatever I got to do to catch fish. But on my home water, I pretty much look for rising trout, and that's my interest now. I like to keep things a lot simpler. I don't get things complicated like I used to. So that's kind of the way I'm going now.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that. And I've noticed that myself, and even with Euronymphing as well, that I've sort of not really bothered with it a great deal and gone back to indicator fishing just because it's fun to cast a line out. And I kind of enjoy it from that point of view. And, you talked about technical and how sometimes you may have, when you were younger, overthought things. And it brings me nicely along to fishing because we've talked about Euronymphing as well. And since you first picked up that rod, has fishing changed? You've obviously said that as an angler you've changed. Have you noticed the changes in fishing as well?
What do you mean, techniques or styles or?
Just generally, are there more people about? Do people look at fishing differently? Do you think social media has made people look at fishing slightly differently? Is it more popular?
Okay, I think there's definitely more people on the rivers since the COVID pandemic. A lot of people started fishing then, and so I see them more. The South Platte River has always been popular because it's there's a lot of people live on the Front Range of Colorado. If you get farther back into the mountains, you may not see as many folks. And our small streams in Colorado are an underutilized resource. They're really fun to fish. I'm doing more of that. Take a couple of size 12 Adams and fish it all day, and you'll catch fish. There's nothing big, but it's a lot of fun.
Lovely. That sounds like heaven to me. I'd love to touch on your books because I know there are plenty of people here who have read and enjoyed them over here. And I wanted to talk about Fishing Small Flies, which was the follow-up to Tying Small Flies. And what made you want to tackle what is in some respects, a difficult subject in the sense of anglers being able to fish the patterns and tie them and everything else. Was it a method that you were fishing yourself that you wanted to share with people?
The reason I started fishing small flies is because my home water is the South Platte River, and it's well known for small flies. If you want to catch fish, you're going to have to fish small flies. And I call the small fly size 16 or smaller, hook size. And that's basically what got me into it. And then I just kind of evolved it into these books. And it's been a lot of fun for me to write those books. It's what I know. I guided for 20 years, and I learned a lot from guiding. I learned how crucial it is to spot fish and fish to those fish, whether you're nymph fishing or dry fly fishing. Because a lot of us fish, if we're nymphing, we fish the fish we see. And it makes it a lot more fun for me.
And so was that because the subject matter of the book, it felt to me, and perhaps this was part of the guide in you as well, that it's not just about the flies. There's a lot of strategies in there. You talk about casts, the tackle, leaders, fascinating section on rise forms, and a whole lot more. Was that do you think that sort of came from the guide in you and author that made you want to share as much information as possible?
Yeah, it made me think. The guiding made me think a lot more about how to catch these fish and where you're going to find them. And another interest of mine is once again simplification, putting as little between me and the fly as possible, or me and the trout as possible. And that means a single dry fly or a merger when I can fish it. And sometimes I'll fish two flies. I'll trail something behind a dry fly, but that's kind of the direction I'm going now.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people who want to fish small flies, and let's say we're going below that sort of size 18, I think, and as a former guide myself, I know sometimes people have issues with spotting the flies on the water. And I think that sort of in part plays into the confidence aspect, that if they can't see the fly and the fish rises, then at times they're not fishing as confidently as perhaps they could. What strategies or advice would you advise people to adopt when wanting to go down this route of fishing those smaller patterns?
The first thing I do, if it's possible, and I don't know what it's like where you live, but if it's possible, I encourage people to get as close to the trout as they can without spooking the fish. And you can do that if you're careful and set up your casting position right. You can do that. If you can't do that, there's some tools you can use. A lot of times I won't cast slackline casts as much. I'll just do a straight cast if I can't see the fly. And then if anything comes up near where that fly lands, I'll set the hook. If you do a slackline cast, a lot of times I'm not exactly sure where that fly is landing, because a lot of times you've kind of taken all the energy out of your cast. And so if there's a breeze or something, you don't know where it's at. But it can get interesting.
And would you suggest as well trailing that smaller fly behind a dry? Is that something you ever use?
I do that often, and I learned that in the guide business. And a lot of times, if I'm thinking my dry fly is spooking the fish, or the fly that I can see is spooking the fish, I'll put a little dab of strike putty on the knot between my tippet and my leader, and that'll give me a general idea of where my fly's at, and I can set if they come up.
That's a great tip. And if somebody wanted to use the dry, a bigger dry as an indicator, how far apart would you put the larger dry and the smaller one?
Well, it depends on what they're rising to, because there's certain hatches where I'll put it only like 10 inches behind. Typically, I'll put it about 14 or 15 inches. And if you're trailing a fly behind that's unweighted, a thing to remember is you may not see your dry fly go down when the fish takes it. You may just, it'll help you visualize or see where the fish is. You'll see a rise come up close to your dry fly and you'll set, and then you're on the fish. But if you've got a beadhead fly below your dry, well, then it'll certainly act as a strike indicator. But some of our rises are so subtle here, you'll barely see that dry fly move when the fish takes it.
Wow. And so when it comes to tackling those rise forms, will you sort of, if you've seen if it's okay to pick your brains about this, actually. So let's imagine you're on the South Platte, you think there's going to be blue-winged olives, but you see a fish rise. What do you actually do? What's the process that you go? Because I'm guessing you're not the sort of person who fires out a cast straight away, that you're going to think about the whole process and the fly selection as a result of that. What would you actually go through if you, let's say you see a fish rise? How would that play out for you?
First thing I'll do is I'll try to determine what it's rising to. And typically, if it's on my home water, I pretty much know, but I'll try to get a sample, see about what size it is. And then what I'll do, and this is what a lot of people miss out on, is I'll try to set up a casting position that's really advantageous to me. A lot of people just start casting, and that can get you into trouble. And just the few minutes that you're thinking this through, I think it calms me down, and setting up the casting position. And then I'll go from there. I do a lot of downstream and across reach casts to these fish, just because they're kind of spooky. So if I can get away with that, I'll do it. And then I go from there.
Fantastic. And it's really interesting that a lot of the time on the podcast, when I speak to skilled and knowledgeable anglers, that so many have said how close that you can get to the fish with careful wading. And actually, my previous guest, Stuart, was just saying the other day that, put yourself in that position. And I always think that, how can I make the cast easy? And that's that's one of the reasons I asked the question, because you see a fish rise and it's very easy, isn't it, just to shoot that cast off. But by a little bit of preparation and not showing the fish, the fly, too many times, you've got a better chance, right?
I think so. Yeah. Another way to look at it is the closer you can get, the less there is that's going to go wrong. And you're going to get plenty of chances to make long casts, to trout or longer casts. But if you can get close, why not take advantage of it?
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you about leaders in the book as well. I guess they're pretty important for you. How do you like to approach your leaders? Do you tie your own? Do you buy knotless tapered leaders? How do you set up with leaders for fishing?
For quite a while now, for the past decade or so, I tie my own leaders. The only disadvantage in that is if you fish a tail water, or you fish water where maybe something changes and the lake turns over above it. If you have all those knots, you'll get a lot of gunk on the leader that you tie yourself. And sometimes I'll switch to a knotless leader, but almost always I use my own tied leaders. I like it because I can get a more rigid butt section in the fly that'll turn that leader over more easily.
And if I remember rightly, there's some leader formulas, are there, in fishing small flies as well?
There is. I'm pretty much using AK Best's formula. I fished with him for a number of years, and I learned a lot from him. And I use his formula. Doesn't have to be too long, 10 feet, 12 feet. And if I need more length, I can lengthen them out.
Fantastic. And what about tippet diameter then? If you're fishing, let's say you've tied on a size 20, I'm guessing you're thinking about tippet diameter too.
Right. And I don't know. I use 6X almost all the time. If the fish if I think I'm spooking them with that tippet size, I'll go to a 7X. And if I'm fishing tiny flies for the fun of it, like size 28s or 30s, you got to go to an 8X because you can't get it through the eye of the hook.
Yeah, absolutely. And so does your small fly box, does that hold a whole lot of patterns? Is there a lot in there that you need to cover, or do you have basics that tick the boxes for you?
I've got some basic flies that I use in small fly fishing. I'm carrying a lot less flies than I used to. Uh, and I, when I was in the guide business, I mean, having a whole bunch of flies, it just made you feel more secure. But since I'm out of the business now for my own fishing, I can make less flies work pretty well. And that's, I try to tie flies that cover a lot of ground, cover a lot of territory. And then if I come up against something I didn't expect, I can usually find something that'll work.
Nice. And the casting tips that you put in there, were they fun to include as well?
Oh yeah, they were a good time. I'm still not as good a caster as I'd like to be, but I think we're all like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so once you'd finished the book's gone out, did you learn anything from that? Was that sort of a pleasing process when that book hit the streets, and I guess people were starting to contact you and ask you about fishing small flies and how best to approach? Was that a nice part of the project too?
It was a nice part, and I enjoyed getting feedback from other people who are interested in it. And there's a lot of interest in right in my local area because a lot of people fish the South Platte River. But it was fun to hear from other anglers, and I still do. And they really responded to the tying small flies. That people really enjoyed that. People will call up and say, "Well, I've tied all the flies in the book," and that's kind of fun. It's a little. Some of the patterns are a little outdated. I don't use much anymore, but it was a good book. It was a fun book to tie or to write.
And what did you learn? Did you learn anything yourself from writing the book?
I think when you write anything down, it helps you. It helps you sort of order your thoughts on it, and that can help on the river because you get out on the river and you go, okay, maybe I should get a better casting position. And once when I was a guide, I had one of my clients say, "Well, just do what you said in the book." Because I was fishing with them. They said, "Just fish with us." And I went, "Oh, yeah, I better do that."
You've touched on the guiding a little bit. And was that an enjoyable experience for you? Did you enjoy that? Or does it become, because I think the process of being a guide over there is slightly different. I imagine that getting home late, packing the cool box, getting sandwiches ready, all of that, it's a sort of almost a 365 day of the year sort of job. Did you enjoy it up until the moment you stopped doing it?
I enjoyed. I guided for about 20 years, and my season was typically just in the warmer months. Not many people wanted to go in the winter, and it got to the point where I got a clientele, people who would come and fish with me, who were interested in small flies. They were interested in fishing dries, and I'd say the last 5 or 10 years were really fun for me because everybody was interested in basically what I was interested in. I wasn't doing as many beginners.
Yeah, and that's, as a guide, it's lovely when you are affecting people in that way, so that they're coming to that day really, really excited, rather than somebody who's going for a day's fishing. And that's great as well. But it's slightly different, isn't it? When they're really motivated, they've booked you because they've read the book and want to learn from you. And that just really does make those days just a tiny, tiny little bit more special, don't they?
Oh, I think it does. And it got to the point where I learned as much from my fishing clients as they learned from me, because a lot of them had innovative ideas, or they came from a part of the country where they had techniques that I didn't know. So I'd learn things too. And I still fish with some of them, and I haven't guided for 10 or 12 years, but we just go fish now.
And it's much easier when it's like that as well, is that you're not watching everything people are doing. You can actually, that moment, I don't know how long it took you, but it takes a bit of time to switch off that guide mode, because I don't know if you're the same, but I never kind of felt off duty, even if I was socially fishing. And did that take a little bit of time to switch from being a guide?
I was the same. Yeah, I still would sort of look at it as a guide trip, and then I realized, well, we're just friends and we're out fishing now, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I fish with people I used to guide, and when I was just fishing socially with them, I'd always give them the best shot. But now I sort of politely shove them out the way and have a go myself. It's much easier now.
Yes, I'm the same. There's no difference.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, although because we've been circling around Colorado, we've been circling around the South Platte and talking about small flies, but those patterns, and I know I fish them, and I need to make a shout out to Andy Baird as well, over here, who writes for the magazine and has been on the podcast as well, who has championed the use of small flies over here in the UK. And of course, they're a part of just about every trout's diet, and that's why that book was I felt was appropriate to me as well. They're just about everywhere, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Places I've fished, maybe not in the mountain streams as much here, but any more technical streams, spring creeks, tailwaters, even some freestones, you'll find them, but certainly spring creeks and tailwaters.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back a tiny bit into the tying process. When you're tying these little patterns, would I be right in thinking simple is best?
I've gotten more and more that way. Simple. A lot of my flies have a thread body, the right color, a hackle, and then just some sort of wing, and that's it. And I can vary them. They cover a lot of ground. That's what I'm heading more. The simple, the better. Try to just get a good silhouette on the water on your dry flies.
Nice. And these really thin threads must help that process as well now, mustn't they?
Yeah, I tie with Good Broad 10-aught, although that's not available anymore. But there's other threads that are good. I bought a lifetime supply of Good Broad when I heard they were going out of business, or they weren't going to make those anymore. It's Mike Lawson told me years ago. He said, if there's a product that you like, buy a lifetime supply because he'll quit making it.
That makes perfect sense. So, if for listeners, and I'm really hoping this will encourage people in the UK, and I know there's many that do that fish smaller flies, but are there a couple of patterns you could recommend to people to perhaps have a go at tying? I know you talked about very, very simplistic, but are there a couple that you might recommend people can look up and see an image of and perhaps have a go at tying?
I don't think you can go wrong with an Adams parachute. And if you get down smaller, you can just tie the body with gray thread. You don't have to dub it. But that's a go-to pattern. Griffith's Gnat is a classic go-to pattern. And then there's I'm really getting into suspender flies or hanger flies for midges, because when you fish midges, it's the fish are really after those midge pupa, because a midge, the adult actually pops straight out of the shuck and gets into the air right away, but that midge pupa may be hanging there a while, and I'm tying a lot of those. And they can be as simple as a thread body and some CDC as the hanger part. And they can actually match the way some of these midges look right when they pop out of that shuck. Like you'll use tan CDC, which looks a lot like the wings folded up right when that insect pops out of the shuck and into the air.
That's an interesting point. And the chironomids, in the still water scene here, we call them buzzers, and they're an important part of the trout's diet. And I wonder how much more we could be doing on rivers with them. And Fulling Mill had an interesting pattern. I bought some. I have them in my fly box, and I've tried them once or twice. It's sort of like a parasol pattern that has sort of that pupae and then some monofilament of about 2 or 3 inches, and then some yarn to help it float, so that it's just sitting just a few inches below the surface. Have you ever encountered something like that or tried anything like that?
I'm familiar with those flies. I've never fished one, but I'm familiar with them. And that's sort of the same idea that I'm talking about on these suspenders. There's a guy named Masa Kiwi here, and he turned me on to his Hot Creek emerger. And Hot Creek is a spring creek out in California. And that's been a really successful fly for me. Moss has kind of been a mentor for me. He's a great fisherman.
Fantastic. And my good friend Ray, he goes out and fishes Hot Creek, and that's quite a technical, tricky river to fish, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It can get the best of me some days.
I know it's been the same for him as well. And he's got a story he told me about where he went really early in the morning wearing just a pair of Crocs, and he hooked into a fish and lost one of his Crocs down the river as well. So there's one probably floating down there somewhere other, and pretty much had to hop back to the car when he'd gone fishing. But yeah, I'm told it's an amazing place. But well, that's great.
Well, one question. Did he land the fish?
Yeah, yes, he did. Yes, he did. I get the reports from him, and he told me that we first encountered Crocs in Colorado, actually, and we hired we'd never seen them. They'd not hit the UK yet, and we hired a guy to get on an upper section of the Colorado at Granby. Mm-hmm. And the guide there turned up in a pair of Crocs, and I'd never seen them, and I was sort of pointed them to Ray. And we said, wow, this, not seen these before. And then I remember at Denver Airport, before we left, they were stacked up in the airport. And he said to me, this is your last chance, buddy. And I didn't buy them. And then I bumped into him, and lo and behold, they'd hit the UK, and he was fishing them again. Thankfully, the next time I saw him, he had a pair of them. So he had 2 of them. But yes, he got the fly and was in good shape. So that was great. I wanted to, we ventured into tackle a little bit. I wanted to ask you about, before we move on to one of the other books I wanted to talk about, are you still fishing bamboo?
I do fish bamboo. I don't fish it in the winter time like I used to. And the reason I don't is I was fishing once and my hands were so cold. I tried to break some ice out of the tip-top guide, and I broke the tip of the rod. And so I reserve them for the summertime. I like them a lot on small streams, but there's something about bamboo that doesn't compare to anything else when you fish.
And what is that? Because it's, as I said, and I recommend people watch the video that you're in. Is it called Colorado Cane, if I remember rightly?
I think so, yeah. Colorado Cane.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago. I'm a lot more gray now.
I have to admit, I still watch it and wonder what happened to the young lad who was building the rods. Do you know, is he still building rods and fishing?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
No. But what is it for you then that makes bamboo so special? What we talk about it a fair bit on this podcast, and I get correspondence from a lot of people who are either looking at glass rods or bamboo or cane rods. What is it that ticks the box for you? What is it that you said that makes them special? What is it for you that makes them so special?
That's an interesting question, because I can go through all this technical stuff and all the stuff about how these fly rods work, but it basically comes down to, if you like bamboo, you like it. You go out, you cast a few rods, and you like it. And the other thing that's nice about it is you've got all this variation in tapers and the way different makers make the rod. And you almost always end up having a relationship with the builder, because you go back to him, he'll tweak the rod for you. And it's kind of a whole subculture in itself, and I like that as much as anything. And I also like bamboo rods in general tend to have a slower action than graphite, and I like that. I like that slower action.
Yeah. And it's made me think about it a lot. And what I was saying about using an indicator over winter, I think that's just so that I could fish my bamboo rod. And that's the reason I've turned into 365 days of the year or whenever I'm fishing. And, where I was washed off yesterday, my friend Warren and I were going to go fish. And he said, "What are you fishing?" And I said, "Well, it may be this rod or it may be that." He said, "Yeah, I might bring this." And that's kind of nice, isn't it? That you look into the rod cupboard or whatever it may be, and mine's not overflowing with rods, but you can look in and say, well, yeah, it's a nice day for this one or that one. And each one has its own little nuance or character too, don't they?
They do, and you spend more time selecting the rod that's going to fit the stream that you're fishing that day. And I like that a lot too. And I'll fish bamboo for everything. I mean, I'll fish it for warm water bass. I'll fish it for anything like that. And I've had periods where I'd go back to graphite more, but I always come back to bamboo.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to leave, and I'm finding it increasingly harder to actually do so. But your passion for bamboo, is that one of the reasons that you embarked on your book, Splitting Cane? Was that one of the reasons?
It is one of the reasons. And I was writing a column for a small magazine in Montana, and I sort of inherited the column from someone else. And what they do is they would interview bamboo rod builders. And so that's how I got into it. I accumulated a lot of articles and turned it into a book. And that's how that book started. And a lot of people, in fact, one guy offered, he said, I'd pay for anything you needed to do a second edition, but I haven't gotten around to that.
That would be really cool. And could you just, for listeners that don't know it, can you just give us a very, before we go in a little bit more deeply, a rough outline of what it's actually about?
What I did in Splitting Cane is I interviewed a lot of bamboo rod makers, and the idea wasn't to have a buyer's guide. And a lot of people thought that book was a buyer's guide, but I was trying to find at the time bamboo rod makers who were full-time makers who'd committed themselves to full-time. And they would either send me a rod or I would go visit the people and we'd cast the rods and just talk about their rods and how they built the rods. It's not a guide to building rods. It's just basically conversations with rod makers. And I learned a lot of what they think and how they approach making a bamboo rod.
And in the initial list of I'm guessing anyway, that the initial list of the rod makers was longer. Was it difficult to whittle down, excuse the pun, to 16 rod makers? Was that a difficult process, or you just decided it's going to be these 16 and that's going to be the basis of the book?
The 16, that's a good question. But the 16, I already had columns, and I could edit those columns. And then some people I just didn't include, but it was mainly just space. Because a lot of these the makers I included weren't very well known. They weren't top of the line American builders, and I actually caught some flack for that from some bamboo rod users. But bamboo rod people are very passionate, and that's one of the reasons I like it.
Yeah, and I love that, the conversations. It took me back, and I don't know if you know the book or are aware of it, of a book I really enjoyed, a different topic, but within fly fishing, called Wisdom of the Guides. Have you come across that?
I have. Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, I love it. And I always remember the picture of Altroth and some of the other people as well. But I remember that, and obviously the elk hair caddis and the story about that, and those conversations, getting an insight into those people. And I think that's probably why I enjoyed Splitting Cane so much, A, because I was so interested in the subject, but B, the format of it, which gives you the opportunity to ask these builders a lot of really interesting questions. And as a result of the book, you said that you got a little bit of flack from the passionate people out there, but did you see that impacted the marketplace? And again, in the same way that fishing small flies and tying small flies had an impact on that part of our pastime, did you find the book ignited people's interest or reignited people's interest in bamboo again?
I think the book did that, and it's really surprised me because it's been out, I think, for close to 15 or 20 years. It's been out a long time, and people still write me about it and write about the rod makers. Several of those rod makers have passed away, and I still hear from people about them and wanting to know what rod to buy. And I never recommend anybody else. I will tell people what my favorite rods are, but everybody's different. That's another thing that's great about bamboo. The rod can fit your fishing style.
Yeah. And I think I saw, it may have been in the Colorado Cane video, that Mike Clark said that if you buy a bamboo rod, fish it, because it makes him sad that they put so much time and effort into building them, and there's nothing worse than it sitting in a safe cupboard doing nothing. I guess you'd agree with that comment, wouldn't you?
I agree 100%. And for a while, people were buying bamboo rods as an investment, and then the bamboo rod market kind of crashed a little, but now it's back. And there's a lot of makers now who they're not doing it full time. They're kind of advanced hobbyists, and you can find a bamboo rod at the same cost of a high-end graphite rod now. I mean, they're available, and that wasn't true when I started. You could get a vintage rod, and that was about it at a decent price sometimes.
And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because often when people think about bamboo rods, they think about, over here it would be old Hardy rods or Sharps or whatever it may be. Yet there are, and I think that's probably what Splitting Cane did for me, that it made me aware that there are these, and I don't know the scene was as it is now, but there are more and more people building them. And I happen to have a close friend who builds bamboo rods for a living, so that's kind of nice as well, that I can talk to him. And I was actually just talking to Luke day before yesterday about rods, and I've got a double hander coming from him in April, I'm hoping. And it was lovely. And I guess you'll understand this, that I saw him recently and said, how does it feel? Not when is it ready? How does it feel when you're planing it? And to me, that is another difference between graphite and bamboo, that the rod, to me at least, feels as though it has some form of a soul.
Oh, I think so too. And I mean, the makers put a lot into these rods. They put their name on the rod, and you don't see that as much. Graphite's it's fine, but you don't get that personal touch. And every bamboo rod's different. Even some of the ones that the same maker makes, it depends on the bamboo. It's a natural material, and everyone's a little different.
Yeah. And I said that, talking about those older rods, and I think I had sort of a Sharps 88. I think it's around here somewhere, actually, I think. But I was in that sort of camp of thinking, right, okay, it's only older rods. I read Splitting Cane. I was absorbed by it. And as a result of that book, I bought a rod from Bernard Ramnuskas. I think I got it through Lenkadella, actually. This is literally the year it came out. I'm trying to think. It must be getting on for 20 years ago now. When I bought that book, I've got it in hardback, and I bought one, and I chose it because I felt I'd like the action. I like the idea of the nodeless construction, which you went into in depth with him about that. And of course, I think he was guiding in Canada at the time. So I took a leap of faith on your interview with him that paid off, and I still fish it a hell of a lot. So thank you for that. And it was a fascinating and really great rod to own. For me, my first modern bamboo rod.
Yeah, Bernard makes a great rod. I'm not sure if he's making them anymore. I know he got into some other things, but the nodeless rod was new to me, and I thought that was really interesting. In fact, I had one out. I was just looking at it this morning before we got together for this conversation, and they're just gorgeous rods, beautiful fly rod, and I like the action on them. He was good. He lived here in Colorado for a while. He moved here, and now I think he lives in Georgia. I don't hear as much from him as I used to.
No, I made contact with him after I got the rod just to let him know. And I believe his wife is English as well, from the UK somewhere as well. So we had a bit of a conversation about it, but I fished that really regularly, actually. And if it has value, I don't really care because it's a special rod for me and I enjoy fishing it. And I fished it in a lot of places and been lucky enough to catch a few fish on it as well. And that was a wonderful one. And then for my 40th again, I have a Mike Clark as well, which was a wonderful rod to own. And like you say, that interaction with people is fantastic. My wife had built a relationship with Mike and Kathy before I knew. And then she said, right, you better phone him because he wants to know what you want. And that's part of that process, isn't it, of interacting with that builder and understanding how they build, what they build, and actions and tapers and everything else. That's a fun and interesting part of it as well, isn't it?
Oh, I think it's a lot of it to me. And like I've had a Mike Clark rod for years, and I'll still take my rod back and he'll tune it up. He'll straighten it if he needs to straighten it. And I think that's part of the whole bamboo rod thing. And Mike's well known. I mean, he's been building them for a long time, and he'll still take the time to take care of you.
Yeah, he was outstanding. He took us fishing for the afternoon, and then he didn't open the next day. And we went fishing again for the whole day. We had a fantastic time, and I've so many happy memories of that, which was great. And AK came down as well, funnily enough. So we hung out with him as well. And it was just one of those really special moments to me. And yes, it's sealed the deal for me as far as bamboo comes. And when it came to the rod, I said, could you build me your typical rod and finish it in the way your action, whatever suits you? And I have an 8-foot for a 5-weight and a 3-piece rod, so I can travel with it. And again, I've been lucky enough to catch a few fish with it as well. So it's been fantastic fun. But for anyone listening, I think Splitting Cane is really a fascinating book. And if you're looking to learn a little and understand about that process of bamboo rods, I think it's a must read, and I think you should try and track it down. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But I'm guessing you're pleased with the impact. Was it really nice to be able to highlight those artisans as well? And did it impact them as well in a positive way? I'm guessing it probably did.
Oh, I think so. I think that it helped some of them build more rods. They're full-time builders, and it helped their bottom line. But it's been a good book for me. It seems like it has legs because it still sells. It surprised me how successful it was in its group, in its category.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you have, I guess this is a tricky and difficult question because it depends where you're fishing, but is there one rod that is the one for you, or I tell you what, I'll give you two. Have you got two that means something special to you, that are the ones, if heaven forbid it, there were a fire, that you would run and rescue?
I like Mike Clark's rods. I like Jim Heidi's rods, and I like Homer Jennings rods. Those are probably the three that I use the most.
They sound like very good choices to me. I wanted to move on because I would think of you as somebody who's read, obviously, the books more in a trout context, but you talked about using bamboo for warm water fishing. And I was looking at your website just the other day and saw you were down in Mongolia as well fishing. Do you like, what are the other species? Is trout, would it be fair to say, your first love? But what else do you like to go chase with a fly rod?
I like to fish for largemouth bass, smallmouth bass. I like pike quite a bit on the fly rod. Uh, and then I went to I went to Mongolia, and that was a whole different story because that's big rods and all, and I'm not a good two hand caster, spay rod caster, so that was challenging on one hand, but it was fun. But I'll fish for anything, but more and more I'm coming back to trout because during COVID you couldn't travel internationally very well, uh, and so trout's kind of what my interest is now. But if somebody makes me an offer, I'll go fish.
And also, I kind of remember that carp around Denver and stuff like that. Is carp on the radar for you as well?
Oh yeah, carp's a lot of fun. We've a lot of carp. They'll follow the damselfly nymph migration in 11 Mile Reservoir, so you can fish trout in the morning, go up there when it's a little bit warmer in the day and catch carp. And it's like getting a dump truck on the hook. I mean, they're really strong fish.
I'm guessing as well, because we sort of have, and it's all good as far as we're concerned here, but we have, not so much ability to be able to sight fish for carp. I recorded a podcast where I did it and called a wild carp actually, and I was astounded. Like you say, a dump carp was an apt description of a fish that was 4 pound, 5 pounds or something. And that's the form of guiding me. So it's probably much smaller than that. But they are phenomenal fish, aren't they? And they really, really do pull. And I guess, as you say, being with the damselflies, you can sight fish to them. That must be pretty exciting too, mustn't it?
Yeah, you'll see fish. You'll see a little bit of, they the bottom gets riled up. You'll see a little bit of mud, and a lot of times you'll see a tail. It's like they'll be tailing, like a trout tails or a bonefish. A lot of people call them poor man's bonefish, but you still got to have a little savvy with them because some of them are a little tough to catch. And if I don't know if you have grass carp in the UK, but grass carp are amazing. I mean, that's quite a fish to get into.
And they're really difficult to catch as well, aren't they, from what I'm led to believe?
I think so too. The first one I caught was by mistake. I was fishing a woolly bugger, and the thing just took it. And then I got interested in them, and they're basically vegetarians. But yeah, they're fun. I've got some local spots where I can catch carp.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I've got a tiny pond in my garden and I've got some grass carp in there, and we love watching them and seeing how they behave along with some mirrors and stuff like that. They're a fascinating species. But that's one of the interesting things. I don't know if you've seen in the US that certainly in the UK, and I don't know if it's climate related or whatever, that we're seeing a wider spectrum of fish being targeted with a fly rod now. Have you noticed that since you started fishing with a fly rod, that people are looking more and more at these different species to go catch on a fly rod?
Yeah, I think it's gotten more and more popular, and it's amazing how many species you can catch on a fly rod. I mean, sky's the limit. But carp in particular, I see, and all of the warm water stuff. The first fish I ever caught on a fly rod was a little panfish in warm water. So I mean, you can catch almost anything.
And you mentioned smallmouth and largemouth bass, and we don't have them over here. How would you describe those as a fish to fish for and catch and play?
Uh, well, the largemouth bass, you can catch them on the surface. You can cast a deer hair frog pattern or something, and they'll just explode on the thing, and it's wonderful. And that's warm water. I tend to fish for those when they come in to spawn. The smallmouth is just like a warm water trout. I mean, they're big, they pull hard, and a lot of things that I've seen smallmouth rise to mayflies in Texas. So I mean, they're very much like a trout, and a lot of fun to catch.
And you mentioned Texas there as well, because I always assume or think of largemouth and smallmouth as primarily lake fish, but I think some of those streams down there actually have them, don't they?
Particularly smallmouth. Uh, Largemouth bass will end up in the streams down there, but they tend to get washed out of ponds. Like if there's a big rainstorm or something, they'll get washed into the rivers. But uh, yeah, they have a thing called the Guadalupe bass, which is a smallmouth that's native to Texas. It's a great bass.
Yeah, I think I've had Steve Ramirez on actually, and I think that's what he specialises in on his home water there, and they sound amazing. The area sounds fantastic as well. So I'm afraid that's another one on the list. But if we excluded the South Platte, if you had to go fish one more river, or is there somewhere that's eluded you that you would love to go fish sometime?
That's a good question. I'm always interested. I like spring creeks, and I fish tailwaters. They're getting crowded, but in terms of rivers that I haven't fished yet, boy, there's no one in particular. I just like fishing. I don't care where it is.
If you were thinking about the UK, have you fished here? And if not, how do you perceive fishing over here?
Uh, I haven't fished UK. I've fished in Ireland years ago, and that was lock style fishing, most of it. Uh, but England would be fun, and I would probably gravitate toward the chalk streams or the spring creeks. But it would be interesting to me to see something other than that, because I'm sure you have streams that are freestones. Most of the what you learn about here is mostly the chalk streams, the spring creeks. But I bet there's freestones that would be fun to fish.
Yeah, absolutely. The chalk streams run down that eastern side of the country, mainly around the southeast, although they go as far as Yorkshire. But most of the streams are freestone, really. So that's where most of the fishing, I would think, away from that, but it could be termed the cradle of fishing, or where a lot of the history of fishing comes from. But and I suppose it probably earns that, because people were able to study the fish, I guess, and it brings us a lovely full circle of what you were saying about being able to spot the fish and see them. So I think if you're on the test or the itching, I think you'd be right at home.
Oh yeah, and I'm curious on your freestones. Do you get hatches and rising trout?
Absolutely, my home river. So I'm down in the southwest of the UK. I live here because there's a lot of streams, and yes, we do. We get the very acidic water. So, and I'm only talking about my part of the world, but the water's very acidic. So the fish are not. They don't get locked on. So they're a little keener, yet we'll get hatches, and we get as you'd call them, the green drakes down here as well.
Right.
And that can be an amazing time. I'm sort of similar to you, that for me, sitting, waiting for a fish to rise and making a cast, getting into position, making a cast, see it rise and set on it, or as can happen as well, miss it as well. But that's what I really enjoy. So I'll wait for those warmer times. My home river runs off the north face of some biggish hills here. And I think I've come to the conclusion that the water, because it's on the north side, runs colder. So it takes longer for the fish to start rising and the bugs to get going. So it won't be till April, I think, until they really start rising properly. But yeah, it's very, very similar in some respects. The landscape, I guess, isn't as majestic as your part of the world, yet in a different way. And if you looked at somewhere like Scotland, for example, it really is awe-inspiring, but in a different way to Colorado or Montana, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
But no, great fun. But so what have you planned for this year? Do you sort of just go with the flow? Or are you traveling, or are you looking forward to heading somewhere within the US that you're going to go fish?
I think I'll spend most of my time, pardon me, in the US this year because I do a lot of travel in the country. I'm on the staff of the fly fishing shows, and I do a lot of travel. And I'm going to concentrate on the smaller streams in Colorado. There's hundreds that I've never fished, and I think that's what I'll do. And of course, I won't miss the major hatches on the tailwaters or the spring creeks because I'm close enough to be able to do that. I mean, we've got blue-winged olives coming. We've got the tricos coming. So I'll be into that, and green drakes. And I'll be fishing. I'll fish with my friend John Gearrock and some other friends. We go to the Frying Pan every year and catch the blue-winged olives there. And we'll be doing that 1st of May.
That sounds a perfect year. Ed, it's been fantastic to be able to speak with you. I mentioned your website earlier. Would you be able to give people details of that in case they want to have a look at what you're writing about and talking about?
Yeah, my website, I've kind of been delinquent in keeping that up, but there's some I was really fired up to get the thing going again, but I haven't really done much for the blog. So I have to say what's there has been there for a while, but it's worth taking a look at. Some of the blog entries are a lot of fun, and with any luck, I'll get back to that. But I'm sort of at a stage in my life and my career where if I can go fishing instead of writing a blog, I'll do it. But that's where that's at now.
Lovely. And it sounds to me like you've got your priorities exactly right. Do you have the web address so people can find it?
Yeah, it's edengleflyfishing.com. That's all one word. Ed Engle Fly Fishing. Yeah.
Fantastic. Ed, we've spoken for over an hour and it's been fantastic. I'd love to have continued talking about rods and fishing and small flies. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you too. It's sometimes I get a little bit anxious about podcasts and all, but this has been really fun talking to you. It's just like a couple of fishermen sitting down and talking.
That's really kind. You've just made my day, and that's all we are, just a couple of fishermen talking. So thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful. As you can probably gather, listeners, I think Ed's books are really worth checking out. And I really do strongly believe in supporting independent booksellers. And I had a look at Kokibondu Books and saw Paul Morgan there has copies of most of Ed's titles. So if you go have a look at anglebooks.com, you'll find them on there. I must add that he's not asked me to do that. He's not paid to go in there. It's just something I believe in. And I think to support independent people is really important to me. So go check those out. You'll enjoy those. Splitting cane, fishing small flies, tying small flies, you'll really enjoy. But thank you once again for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.